Craig Kelly, I have been wanting to talk to you for some time and following you very closely. In these Australian elections, my gut feel is Australia needs a Craig Kelly, and you are standing with the Libertarian Party. So let's begin with that. Tell me, let's pretend I'm a mum and dad family. I've got 3 children. I'm really struggling to put food on the table. Petrol is costing a lot. My business is struggling with the fallout from COVID. How is your party going to help? Give me your top 3 ways you'll help me.
Okay, firstly, libertarianism is about lower taxes and more freedom. That's the simple premise, and every single policy we have flows from that. Many of us in the Libertarian Party, I'd say we are refugees from the former Liberal Party here in Australia. The Liberal Party used to stand for freedom, used to stand for small business, used to stand up for individual rights, but unfortunately, over the recent decade, we've seen them slip further and further to the left, and especially during COVID period, we saw them basically abandon all those principles that many of us held dear. So a lot of us in the Libertarians consider we're refugees from the Liberal Party, and we hold those, what we would call traditional values, of we believe in freedom of speech. We think that's the bedrock of all our other freedoms. Now, we've seen some great erosion of our freedom of speech here in Australia. One of our first policies is we would like to see embedded in our constitution, similar to that the US have embedded in their constitution, which they call their First Amendment, because they say from freedom of speech, all other freedoms flow. So we would like to see an equivalent provision in our Australian constitution that guarantees Australians freedom of speech in the same way that guarantees the freedom of speech in America. So surely we're not second-class citizens or second-class people in the world. At the moment, we have a situation here in Australia where if we're debating someone with the US online, that we can say something that will put us in us being jailed and arrested and jailed for 5 to 7 years, as we're in America, they are free to say it because of the protections they have in their constitution. So that's number one, we protect freedom of speech.
I'll stop you there. You know that I would go as far as saying that Trump is using the tariffs to say to countries, you want a good deal? You better start protecting freedom of speech. And J.D. Vance has definitely underlined that, underscored that. So these Five Eyes countries, particularly New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK, that are really going after us for telling our truths, they're not going to do well with the Trump administration, I'd say. Would you agree with that?
And so we deserve not to. I saw a provision there also. It's a piece of legislation before the US Congress at the moment. And they're basically saying any foreign official that tries to censor or impede the speech of a US citizen in a manner that would be inconsistent with the US Constitution will be banned from visiting the USA. They won't get a visa to the USA. So that's one thing I'd like to see. So we've got hundreds and hundreds of bureaucrats in Canberra that I hope the US says, well, sorry, guys, you are involved in suppressing the free speech of not only Australian citizens, but American citizens. You are not welcome to come to the USA. And it's the same with trade. Over in New Zealand, I don't know if you've been following very closely, but we had a thing called the Mis- and Disinformation Bill, which went before our Parliament.
Can I tell you, Craig, that was launched at the UN by none other than the very devious and deviant Jacinda Ardern. And she has been sitting in Harvard doing this ridiculous far-left nonsense on we are the arbiters of what can be said and what is truth and what is not truth. Who is to arbitrate that? Your truth and my truth may be very different, but if we can speak and discuss, we'll edge towards a truth that we can both agree on. This nonsense of mis and disinformation, where do you stand on that?
Well, first I remember your beloved, tongue-in-cheek, former Prime Minister. I remember her during COVID. She said something like, we will be your single source of truth.
Yes.
And I almost fell off my chair. I thought, how could any politician say such a thing? We will be your single source of truth. And she seemed to get away with it. She seemed to be very popular in New Zealand there for a long time. But and you're right, I saw a speech she gave at the UN where when we want to crack down on this misinformation. Look, it's just a way they want to silence debate because they know what I consider on our side of politics people that believe in a lot of freedoms, that really spoke out against the COVID narrative, that said it was this idea that it was safe and effective was untrue. We're all sensitive. We have the science, the data, and the evidence all on our side, and that's why these people want to silence it. So this legislation was put up in Australia. was called the Mis- and Disinformation Bill. And what it would have created was an effectively Ministry of Truth run by the government that would look at what everyone says and say, no, misinformation must be censored, misinformation must be censored. And we've seen during the COVID period, everything they told us was true, and the people who were accused of spreading misinformation has proven over time to be 100% correct. So this is why you must have free and open debate. So I think one of our former Prime Ministers, Sir Robert Menzies, said it correctly. He said, today's truth is often tomorrow's error. And the only way you reach that final truth is to allow free and open debate and to listen to dissenting opinions. Well, that bill went up before our Parliament, and this was originally drafted by the Liberal Party. Labor Party came in and basically copied it. It went through the House of Representatives, went to our Senate, and luckily we needed 7 of sort of like these crossbench, quasi-independent senators that most of them have a slight lefty sort of leaning. And I thought we had no hope. But there were hundreds of thousands of Australians that got on the phone and rang their offices, sent them emails, wrote them letters, and one after one we had to get all seven of them decided they would vote against it, and that legislation failed by one single vote. We're able to dodge that bullet, right? And then they've come up with another one called, first year they've got the digital ID and an age verification bill. So the age verification now means, and this will happen after our election, that if you want to log on to social media here in Australia, you'll have to have some form of digital ID to prove that you are 16 or over. So the only way they want to exclude, they say if you're under 16 years of age, you cannot have a social media account. Now, the only way you can enforce that is to get those that are 16 or over to prove that they are over 16. So this will mean that everyone will have their digital ID recorded when they log on and make comments on, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, any of the platforms. It'll go across all the platforms, even ones like Rumble and these things. Everyone will have to have a digital ID here in Australia. And then on top of this, they put this other legislation in called the Hate Crimes Bill. And they basically reversed the onus of proof. So there's what they first describe as protected groups, right? The protected groups are basically, and what the protected groups include groups of political opinion. So it's not just like, okay, you might protect groups, people with disabilities, fair enough, okay? Let's protect people with disabilities, right? But they're going like transgenders, sexual preference, so on, right? And also political opinion. Now, if you say something that upsets someone in that group, in one of those groups, and they feel as though, or they have an apprehension about what you said, whether you meant it or not, you could have said it in completely good faith. If you have an apprehension, if they have an apprehension in their mind that what you said could result in some type of like force used against them, and it's not physical violence. They took the word, force is the word in the legislation. Now, force can take many formats. Force can be standing blocking a door. That could be considered force. There can be intellectual or moral force that can be used. So they've got this very generic term, force, used against them. So if they have an apprehension about what you said will result in some type of force being used against them, bang, 5 to 7 years in jail. Now, that is the law of Australia at the moment, and they'll combine that with this digital ID bill, so everyone posting online, they'll know who you are and where you live. And if you post something online that caused someone that apprehension in one of those protected groups, you'll get a knock, like we've seen in the UK recently. There'll be a knock on the door in the middle of the night, off to the police station with the threat of 5 to 7 years in jail. So just that alone, the threat of that will have a great suppression on free speech in this country. And that legislation was voted for by both the major parties, both the Labor Party and the Liberals, which are sort of like what we call the Conservatives in the US or the UK. They both voted for that legislation.
I want to get back to your top 3 policies, but just before that, we'll go down that road. The 2 major parties, Craig, are the left and right wings of an absolutely sick bird, rotten to the core, aren't they? They are the same policy. It's the same in New Zealand. It's the same in every country where WEF globalist puppet people have been placed in positions of power. And Australia and New Zealand are those countries. We're being manipulated by the WEF and UN, aren't we?
Well, we've seen that in the UK. We've seen that in New Zealand. We've seen that in Australia. Thankfully, we haven't seen it. We've seen a bit of a reversal in the US. there under President Trump. He's definitely setting the paving the way for us to get out of a lot of these sort of globalist controlled bodies. But you're right; it seems to be the Commonwealth countries, and you would think that the Commonwealth traditions that we've had, that Westminster tradition, where free speech, individual rights were the bastion, of the Commonwealth, and yet it's the Commonwealth nations that seem to be the most stringent, going in the opposite direction. So much wanting to sign up to all these globalist ideas. I look what's happening in the UK today. I just shake my. I think that country's lost. I really do. I don't know if there's any way back for the UK. Remember, they don't have another general election until 2029. Yeah,
I don't know. A lot of people really loathe Starmer, and he's loathsome. So if the people push for an early election, and they may, there could be a group, and Rupert Lowe, Ben Habib, Andrew Bridgen, who are good souls, a bit like yourself, who really do care about the people. But it's close. I agree with you. It's close. They're almost lost.
I'm not 100% a favour with the UK system. My understanding is that there's a set period when it has to be in 2029. And the only person that can actually bring it forward would be, firstly, if the government couldn't function because so many Labor members defected to another party. And they've got so many members, and the Labor Party are very good at disciplining them, and it's execution at dawn if you speak out against the party. Or the Prime Minister of the day decides to have an early election. So I can't see Starmer wanting to call an early election. So the UK's got another 4 years of the track they're heading down. Now, I don't know what that country will be like. If they continue to go down the road they're going, we're going to see a UK in 2029 that we would have never dreamt of seeing in our lifetime.
And the online rollout of digital ID is just happening right now in Ireland. Both Ireland and England are roiling underneath the surface. The anger is palpable. I mean, the third path is that the people take to the streets and really win their countries back. But this Australian election is so crucial. I mean, if the dominoes fall the right way and there are some good people who can really stop this rot that is spreading, this cancer, it'll put steel in the spines of the Englishmen as well. It's
unfortunately, I hate to say this,
yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. If we look at the opinion poll, firstly, we've had the worst government in our nation's history. Albanese's been the worst prime minister. Our GDP per capita is falling compared to the rest of the world. Our household income is going backwards. We're down 8% average household incomes, disposable income since Albanese became Prime Minister. He's imported 1.3 million people into the country, double the amount that he said he was. That's caused this massive housing crisis, massive rental crisis. We've got Australians living in cars and under bridges and in tents. We've got a whole entire generation that have given up on what we like to call the great Australian dream of a home ownership. We've got 100,000, 120,000 more people unemployed since Albanese came to office. And all the job creation over the last couple of years, the last year, 80% of the jobs have been created have been government jobs, paid for by deficit spending. Albanese went to the last election promising everyone $275 off their electricity bill. That was this huge promise he had. That's failed. Electricity prices have gone up, not down. He's just told lie after lie after lie. He should be absolutely getting smashed in the opinion polls. And yet the latest opinion polls show that he's likely to retain power, which is just, I just shake my head and wonder what's wrong with so many people in the country. So many people in the country are still not awake.
But you know what? I think I do have a feeling, Craig, that they do push polling with the polls, that the polls are no longer telling the truth. They haven't told the truth about COVID-19. They're willing to lie to us about anything now. So if they put out poll numbers that are falsely pushed up for the main parties, then people think, oh, well, they're going to win anyway, so I'll choose one of them. This election, above all else, Australians have to be inordinately brave. Would you agree with that? They have to go beyond what they've ever done.
I do. Remember, we have a preferential voting system, so even if you may think you'd rather chew your left arm off than see Albanese elected, you can vote for one of those minor freedom parties and then preference the Liberal Party. So your vote doesn't go to Albanese. If we don't get, it will be far better if we get many candidates from the freedom party as we can into the next parliament. And I've talked the Libertarians, obviously that's the party I belong to, but there's several other good parties also are campaigning similar to ourselves. If we could get a few more of people, with that ideology into the parliament, will be a much stronger parliament, and people can vote that way and preference back to the Liberal Party. So in case for some reason we fall short, their votes go back to the Liberals to try and stop Albanese from taking more power.
But where do you stand on the Liberals? I mean, both Albanese and Dutton from afar look as if they are frightened of talking to the people. I've seen people manhandled away from both of those sorry, tawdry leaders because they won't even have a conversation with the Australian people in the streets or in a hallway. There's something wrong when the leaders will not talk to their own people, isn't there?
There is. Look, as I said, Mr. Albanese has been our worst ever Prime Minister. All the data, all the numbers, all statistics show that. But Mr. Dutton has been the real disappointment. He could have stood up on so many issues, but it's sort of like the idea that they're trying to appease voters that will never vote for the Liberal Party. Well, we've got here like the government broadcasting Australian, the ABC. They're meant to, by legislation and law, be unbiased and impartial, and yet they're completely controlled by the left, right? Side of politics. They don't employ one single conservative news presenter. Every news program they put to air has this leftist bent to it, right?
Just like America, with the legacy media.
Dutton's frightened to say anything or speak up.
Yeah.
It was such during COVID. He won't even say we should have a royal commission into COVID. He won't even say, look, here in Australia, we've got that beautiful black coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard. It's been our source of wealth for decades and the source of low electricity for decades, right? Dutton is going along with Albanese. We have to close down all our coal-fired power stations. They're both agreeing we should sign up to the World Health Organization Global Pandemic Treaty. So Dutton's been just so frightened. He's frightened that he'll be attacked by the left in the media. But these people will never vote for him. What that does, those in the middle that are a bit undecided where they go, if they look at the conservative side of politics, and they're not fighting the fight and arguing the case and sort of saying everything on the left, oh, they're right, they're too frightened to speak. Well, those undecided voters drift to the left. And
yes.
that's why you're only going to get that undecided middle to come across to the conservative libertarian side if you stand up and you are brave. Right? You've got to stand up and take the hits and be prepared to argue your case. And I keep saying, all the facts, all the data, all the evidence, and all the science is on our side.
You're very good. You do remind me in some ways of Andrew Bridgen, actually, Andrew's a good friend, and I like the way you speak, Craig. I like your straight up style.
Thank you. I followed Andrew closely because we had very similar things that happened to us. I was a member of the Australian Parliament, a member of the government, and I sort of saw what was happening during COVID and thought, this is insane. This is madness. Why I'm looking at the evidence and the data. I'm seeing white. And all my colleagues in the party are seeing black. And the media I'm saying what is just simply common sense. And the media are eating me alive. And I saw exactly the same thing happen to Andrew over in the UK. And in fact, I would have, if I had the time and a few extra dollars, I'd have loved to have gone over and campaigned for him during the election campaign that he fought. And then he had some disastrous result over there in his own seat. And I had exactly the same experience. I think that people didn't want to vote for us because it was an admission that they had made a catastrophic error by getting themselves injected. And they didn't want to admit that error. And by voting for either Andrew, I can't remember what his seat was called in the UK, or myself in my seat, if people had voted for us, they were making an admission that they had made a mistake that not only harmed themselves, but potentially harm their families and friends. And it was much easier to say, no, I'm not going to make that admission yet, And yet,
but I don't hold back on this. I think we're dealing with a cabal of absolute cheats and liars with no conscience whatsoever. And Andrew got 64% in his previous election, 64% of the vote in his seat. In the last one, he was awarded 3%.
I saw that.
Now the key is that everywhere he goes, people go, I voted for you. All my family voted for you. All my whole workplace voted for you. So I would say he's definitely been cheated out of it, and you possibly as well. Now, this could be a huge thing in the Australian election, Craig, because Stalin himself said it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes. So how are you going to protect Australians from being cheated out of what they want?
Look, we do have we've got to be careful on this. Firstly, you may not know, at the last election, I was taken to court by the Australian Electoral Commission. On the eve of the election, we have elections on Saturday. On the Friday night, the Australian Electoral Commission went to the federal court and put in an emergency application against me that would have prevented me from campaigning on election day. Unprecedented, right? And they were arguing over the font size of the authorisation. So when we print up a core flute, right, we've got to have our rules. So we've got to have a little authorisation down the bottom. So it says like authorised by Craig Kelly. Inside these core flutes, it said my picture on it. Craig Kelly, your local MP, right? And down the bottom, it's got authorised by Craig Kelly. So the AEC were arguing that the font size was too small. There were no regulations about the law. Basically said that the font size had to be legible from a distance it was meant to be seen. And my core flutes, you could walk up to them and you could see them from a metre away. And all the standard eye tests and eye standards say you can see 8-point font from easily from 2 metres away. And despite that, they took me to court. So we won that court case. So I got a call from our people at 8:30 at night saying, there's a court case on at the moment. They're trying to stop you from campaigning tomorrow. Right?
Wow.
And I thought this was some joke. This is our electoral commission. And after the election campaign, they then took me to court again. They were suing me, seeking penalties of up to $500,000 in the Federal Court of Australia, arguing over the font size on my core flutes was too small. And we asked them, well, what was the correct size? No, we can't tell you what the correct size is, but it has to be seen from a distance that's meant to be visible from. It's just the judge, and I've gone into the court first. I think the judge is going to throw this out in 2 minutes. And this court went for 3-day hearing, right? And I'm in some Soviet show trial here.
Yes.
I'm thinking, it is firstly, no one was misled, no one was deceived, no one was tricked. The authorisation was correctly on the things. We're arguing over a font size, right? And the judge eventually, thankfully, the judge finally saw what an outrageous, malicious prosecution it was, and gave the Australian Election Commission a bit of a hiding in his final judgment, which was for me. But this cost, I was lucky I had a benefactor paying my legal fees. I'd have had to spend several $100,000 in legal fees if I tried to defend this myself. Right? And I did an FOI afterwards. The AEC spent over $500,000 in going after me.
Oh, that is so
This is the
corrupt.
Australian Election Commission now trying to sort of bankrupt me to prevent me from ever running again. So I had have lost that case, right? If they had have won, the first sort of like 6 hours of the court case, I'm sitting there and I thought, this is a shame. You see those old movies of the Soviet show trial sort of thing. I think I'm in a movie. I've got people, friends that come on there, just look at me and they go and shaking their head. They go, I don't believe this. Yeah. And
it's like that emoji of the clown world of the last 5 years since COVID-19 was rolled out, the upside down nature of it, the ludicrous lawfare that's been rolled out. In fact, it does go back to a real communist Marxist agenda. Are you aware of the imprint of Agenda 2030 and the communist Marxist breakdown of it over all of this? Yeah. Australia and New Zealand are being herded into smart cities, into full control. You mentioned the digital ID. You combine that with central bank digital currency, and you've got a gulag. You've got a gulag like the Russians. Yeah,
right. Look, we thought the Cold War was over.
Yeah,
the Berlin Wall fell, but a lot of these people went and embedded themselves in bureaucracies. And what I see, a lot of these government bureaucrats that get involved in it, it's about almost like they are superior and they are more enlightened and they are more virtuous. And if they could control how everyone lives their life, the world would be so much better. And I think that's where a lot of these people are totalitarians.
Yes,
take away people's freedoms or take away people's rights, whether they're a combination of the neo-fascists, the fascists of the old, and the
Yes.
communists of the old that want to dominate, control, over people, say what people can. They want to control us, say what we can hear and think, stop us from thinking what we freedom of that, because they seriously think that they are more enlightened and they are more virtuous. And yet, you look at the decisions they've made during COVID, right? These geniuses got everything wrong, caused catastrophic economic losses to our economies, right? Caused untold hardship to people, and it would be hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths that these people caused.
Yes. And, if we put that against that Marxist agenda, it is to drive us as societies to our knees. So we will beg them for the crumbs that they'll offer, which will give you a UBI, will give you a universal basic income maybe,
right.
But you will do exactly what we want. You will not say one thing we don't like or you'll lose it all. And that is full totalitarian control. Yeah. I'll put the piece, the summary of it from Andrew Bridgen underneath this interview. It's a very good summary. But speaking of people, we are going to come back to the 3 top things for a family, but we're here talking about free speech. And speaking of people who think they're superior, to me from afar in New Zealand, to me, the Teals are absolutely insufferable. And I want to play here a journalist.
I'm so glad you can see that, because it's exactly how I feel here. These people, they are the most obnoxious, self-righteous, holier-than-thou mob that you would ever meet in your life.
They're most unattractive. I wouldn't want one of them representing me in Parliament. I think there was one who, on her beautiful Northern Beaches property, didn't want windmills off the shore of her lovely beach, but she had put them in everybody else's beach.
Just to explain that, you've got sort of like Sydney, and the most expensive part of Sydney is our eastern suburbs and our northern beaches, right? The northern beaches are beautiful, but the average house price there now is like $4 or $5 million.
Yes.
Right? So unless even if you win the lottery today, you still can't buy a house up on the northern beaches. So, and the property values have increased. A lot of these people have bought these places, 20, 30, 40 years ago. You find a lot of these people in their 50s and 60s and 70s. They bought these places years ago. They've seen an uplift in their property value that's made them multi-millionaires without ever having to really do anything, just through the good luck of the draw. Now, the government here wants to put offshore wind turbines off the coast of Sydney. So what they've done, not off the coast of Sydney or the northern beaches, they've pushed them further up north of Newcastle and pushed them down into the Illawarra, down in the Wollongong zone. So like 120 k's north, 100 k's to the south, right? So there's nothing, you can't put them in, not in our backyard sort of thing. They're all further offshore wind turbines, but not where we can see them.
And let's face it, where people don't quite have the multi-million-dollar homes, where they won't have the power to stand up the way that these people would. What was the name of that one? Was it Zali Steggall?
That's it.
Yeah.
Zali Steggall. That's the one.
She's a most unappealing character.
Well,
but what were you going to say?
She gets enormous runs, enormous free run in the media here. The ABC, they report on her as though, and she. So superior and so more enlightened, and she's all for integrity and transparency, and they found out she was taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from people involved in the coal and gas industry. There's no transparency, there's no integrity, and the thing is, what's likely if we have a hung parliament after this election? These people are going to decide who forms government, who becomes the prime minister. So they should, for transparency and honesty and integrity, they should be going to their electorates and saying, in the event of a hung parliament, I'll be supporting either the Labor Party or the Liberal Party. They're not saying that. I'll tell you the reason they're not saying that, because we know for sure that they'll support the left side of politics. They basically come in and pretended that they were these community independents, right? And dress themselves, we're all for the community, transparent, right? When they're actually far left advocates, and they have taken. It's been a successful formula for them because they've been able to capture several seats that were normally very strongly conservative seats and turn them into these sort of teal, what we call teal seats.
But what's really irritating to me as well, they say they're transparent and they don't even admit that they are all teals. They keep saying, as you say, we're independents. They're not even being transparent from base one. And I love this cut. Let's have a look. It's slightly long, but she is a journalist, and this is very rare. A journalist I admire in the world is Peter Credlin. She's so intelligent. I love watching her pieces. Let's have a look at this. And she ends up with the line, "Hypocrisy, thy name is teal." Just let's have a look here.
The teals. Now, they say they want integrity in our public life, but they don't practice what they preach. First, there was the theft of Liberal posters by the husband of Kooyong Teal, Monique Ryan. Then Ryan had this train wreck of an interview on Sunday, refusing to call out social media cash for comment, the use of paid influencers to spruik for Teal candidates.
Should it be clear to voters, people who are looking at this content, that it's paid for by the politician?
Look, I don't really have an opinion on it.
Really? You don't think voters deserve to know that if someone they're watching is saying great things about a politician, whether they're being paid by that politician?
Look, I'd have to give it some thought. It's not something I've given great thought to myself.
You'd have to give that some thought.
Well, I would think that it would be clear. I don't know. I think I'd have to give it some thought, Damon.
Today, Kooyong's campaign Karen, well, she struck again. With the Kooyong Teal, kindly call me Dr. Monique Ryan, caught out in more hypocrisy. Now, just take a look at this. Leaked scripts from the pollsters UCOM show that the Teals are push polling voters. That's right, polling people in a way that's designed to manipulate their vote. And here's how the Kooyong camp is doing this, with a series of text messages that someone I know well inside that seat sent me today. So let's have a look. First up, voters are questioned whether they would be, quote, more likely to vote for the Liberal Party if it distanced itself from the National Party and the extreme agenda of MPs like Barnaby Joyce and Matt Canavan, who oppose taking action on climate change, and wait for this, want to roll back abortion rights. Another question asks voters to agree or disagree that, quote, the Liberal Party have failed to release any detailed policies which address the challenges faced by everyday Australians. Another question, bit of a preamble here, quote, Dr. Ryan, that's not in there, is it? Dr. Ryan has successfully pressured the government to reduce HECS debts for more than 3 million Australians, make changes to the stage 3 tax cuts and cut the cost of prescription medicine. Now, the Teals are supported by cashed-up vested interests and are practising the worst sort of manipulative, dirty politics. You want to talk about American politics infecting our democracy? Well, push polling is it. Hypocrisy, thy name is Teal.
And that Monique woman who was caught out, I mean, you can actually see her looking on screen, and I've interviewed a lot of people. Her brain, if it had a bubble coming out, would be going, how can I lie my way out of this?
That's right.
It was so patent. She wasn't looking for the truth. She wasn't going to tell the people actually what's going on. She was thinking, how can I slither out? And that is the very antithesis of what Australia or New Zealand needs in our politicians. We've got enough of those.
Well,
Yeah.
She was a masked Nazi. She was elected straight after COVID, and she was telling everyone they must wear their masks, right? And she actually stood up in Parliament there one day, and she's there speaking and talking, and they're giving her a bit of like interjection, and she yelled out, "Put your masks on!" like a school teacher, right? So she's not wearing her mask, yelling out for everyone else to put their mask on, right? And then she said, "Oh, she always wears the mask out." And there's these photos of her at all these events without a mask. I don't understand these people. When you've got all those science, you've got all these peer-reviewed studies showing that masking was completely ineffective. Yeah. And she was going on still saying that everyone had to wear a mask.
I was talking to Steve Kirsch a while ago, the American campaigner who's now close to RFKJ, who had a book this thick explaining why masks are completely useless for stopping any kind of viral infection.
The thing is, the holes in the mask are bigger than the virus particles. So when you sneeze or cough, they go straight through.
There was a lovely metaphor, Craig, trying to stop that material from a sneeze going through a mask is like saying, I'll stop a mosquito passing through a chain link fence. It's
And
and so
we had. That's one thing I got fined for during the COVID period. We had laws here in Australia where you had to wear a mask outside, and they were forcing farmers to wear masks.
and in New Zealand
on their property by themselves, right? So they could have been 100 k's from anyone else. They're in their tractor ploughing the fields, and if they didn't have a mask on, they'd been fined. But that was the absurdity of the rules. I was actually filming a television commercial some commercials we were doing at the last election, and this we call them these Karens came along and said, Mr. Kelly, why haven't you got your mask on? You should have your mask on. I said, lady, madam, I'm filming a television commercial. I'm outside. These things are useless. Please go away and leave us alone. So she went and made a report to the police station.
No.
And she said, hey, this is Eric. And the police thought it was such a serious crime. They sent these officers. So it was in a public park which backed onto houses, right? On a river, right? So they sent police officers to go and ask for all the CCTV footage from all the houses, about a dozen houses, trying to find CCTV footage to back up her statement that I wasn't wearing a mask. As if there's not enough things to do with like crime in the country. They were looking for CCTV footage and going around door knocking to try and find that they could prosecute me for. So I ended up arguing, fighting it in court, sort of thing, and so I just wasn't going to put up with that,
Honestly, and the woman who squealed on you, she should
That's
be
right.
absolutely ashamed. It really was a dark time, and many people saw their own darkness in that period, because I cannot imagine how the police, it was an IQ test as well. So those police doing that, they failed dismally. Let's get back to the Teals. I thought that was interesting what you said earlier. Nobody in Australia really likes the main parties. They don't like those two pathetic leaders. They can see through them. At least there's that amount of awakening. But the trouble is, and we saw it in the New Zealand election, there are some very false operatives who are pretending to be friends, for example, to freedom or to integrity, as you say, transparency, and they're not at all. They've been put in there to try to suck the people still back into the narrative which will lead to Agenda 2030 while looking more free, more open. And I just think the Teals seem to fit into that category, extremely untrustworthy. Do you think they could end up holding some kind of balance of power?
If you look at the numbers, the polling results, it's highly probable.
Wow.
We look like it looks like neither party's going to have enough. It looks like have enough numbers. You've got both the latest polling shows. You've got the Labor Party on 33%, the Liberal Party on 33%. Now, on those numbers, neither of them can win enough seats outright by themselves. Right? It's highly unlikely to form government by themselves. So they're going to have to find some of the, these crossbenchers or non-people outside the major parties to help join with them to form a government. So the first place that the Labor Party will go to will be to these Teals. So we've got people voting in these otherwise very conservative electorates, right, thinking they're voting for some community independent. They're going to make sure that we get another 3 years of Albanese in the worst government we've ever had in our nation's history. So they're just running a complete and utter con job. They're leftist groups that have morphed themselves. I'll give them some credit. They're very clever in the way they've done it. Because
they're cunning. They're cunning.
Cunning is the word. Right? Clever is not the word. Cunning is the word. Very cunning. And they have tricked tens of thousands of Australians into think they're voting for some, virtuous community independents who look after their interests, when these people are just going to sell us out to the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, and do everything they can to basically push this net zero agenda, which here in Australia, everything about it surrenders an economic and military advantage to the communist Chinese.
And you talked about the coal seam before and shutting that down, this incredible industry in Australia. Well, China is known for opening new coal mines every week and the enormous furnaces burning coal there with impunity. It is, and what our output, Australia and New Zealand, is minuscule compared with that. The whole thing is a con.
I'll give you some of the numbers on this. Now, I'm not sure about New Zealand, but here in Australia, we've got 21 gigawatts of the capacity of our fleet of coal-fired power stations is 21 gigawatts, right? So I think it's 20. Okay. In China, the current capacity of theirs is like 1,140. Right?
Good
So
heavens.
we're 21, they're 1,140. Now, our 21, both the Labor and Liberal Party say we've got to close all those down. And we've got to replace it with wind turbines from China, solar panels from China, and big batteries from China, right? And we can't use our coal. But we can export our coal to China, right? Now, on top of that, China, on top of the 1,100 already have, they've got another 421 gigawatts of coal-fired power station under construction and development. So they've got 20 times what we are closing down. They are building new on top of the 50 times that they've already got. And we think we're going to save the world. It is preposterous. If we fought a war and lost the war, and the enemy came into our country and said, you know what, you Aussies, you're not going to use your coal, but we're going to ship it back to our country to use. That is what would happen if you lost a war, and that is what has happened to our country today. And it's being sanctioned by both the major political parties.
Do you think, Craig, we're in a war, in a version of a World War III?
Absolutely. We are fighting a war against these people. Right? They want to impoverish us. You think, well, if you lost a war, the enemy would come in and might force the population to be injected with an experimental substance.
Yes.
That is something that would occur if you lost a war.
And definitely the enemy would silence the people when they've vanquished them, when they've broken them.
We've got Anzac Day coming up. That's why this week, that's why our forefathers, Australians and New Zealanders fought.
Yes.
So that their sons and daughters wouldn't be forced by some government bureaucracy to be injected with some substance against their free will. And that's what these people did to us. And they expect us to forgive us and move on. Sorry, Liz, I'm not forgetting and I'm not moving on. That's why I put my hand up to run in Parliament. I want to hold all these people that did all these things to so many thousands of Australians, millions of Australians, forced them to get injected against their will, destroyed their businesses with these lockdowns, locked them away from dying relatives from seeing. I want to hold these people to account.
That's powerful. I was on an X Spaces with Jim Ferguson from the UK this morning for over 4 hours. And those people who have been jab injured, do you know what their cry is over and over again? We just want to be heard. They have been so diminished, demeaned, dismissed, and told they're imagining it, and then there's no government help whatsoever. So what would you do to help them? Because there's a vast number of people there who might vote for you on that ground alone.
Firstly, we still have a few places that have existing vaccine mandates, right? Anyone that has been still enforcing vaccine mandates, I would make some law and have them arrested, because they are engaged in what Peter McCullough correctly refers to as reckless, negligent homicide.
Yes.
Right? That's what these people should be arrested, and they should be charged through their own selfishness and their own ignorance and stupidity to continue to want to force Australians to inject an experimental substance that has proved not only has proved this doesn't work, it actually has shown you've got all those studies from the Cleveland Clinic and other places that show the more times you're injected, the more likely you have COVID. So if you were terrified about getting COVID, the last thing you want to do was inject this substance into your body, because it means you are more likely to have COVID. So it's not only not effective or ineffective, it actually has negative efficacy. And now the safety data that just comes out, there's study after study every single day showing the catastrophic safety data of these vaccines. Just shocking.
Totally ignored by the ABC. Certainly TV1
that's right.
here totally ignores it.
Every time I post it, I often put myself, so I wonder if the ABC will report this.
Yes, I've seen that. They are appalling. Just on that, what would you do about the ABC and these pathetic government-funded organisations that no longer bother even trying to have the appearance of telling the truth?
Okay, ABC, $1 billion Australian dollars a year they're costing the taxpayer.
Wow.
Right?
For propaganda. Propaganda.
Okay. So every Australian has to pay compulsory through their taxes to fund the ABC, whether they listen to the ABC or whether they think the ABC is a leftist propaganda outfit, right? We defund them. Sorry, guys, no more government money for you, right? But if you like, you can have all your supporters can make a voluntary donation. And you know what? On your tax return, let's have a little box, and you can put how much extra tax you would like to pay to give that money to the ABC.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I'm
That's a
sure
more
all the-
sophisticated Doge, actually.
Yes,
That's very good.
all these lovies that love their
Yes.
ABC, right? I'm
Mm.
sure they'll be very pleased to pay extra taxes to give them. And that way, we take away their requirements of not to be biased in one direction and give a balanced reporting. That way, if they're funded by their lovies, they can be as left wing and as propaganda as they like if they're being privately funded, but not by the government. So that's what I would do. I think if you're at the ABC, that could be a good idea. Who knows? They could even get more than $1 billion with all these lovies all these very rich socialist lovies that live in our North Shore. I'm sure they would make a very big donation to fund the ABC that they love so much. So that's what I'd be doing with the ABC.
I don't know, Craig. I think those lovies, their purses tend to stay very tightly snapped shut when it comes
see
to
a bit of
actual personal contribution.
in me saying that, because I know that's more likely what's going to happen.
So Craig, what would you do about media? Because funnily enough, the theme of this so far has been that crucial one of free speech. I realized years ago in the early COVID days, goodness me, without free speech, you cannot have a democracy. You can't even approach a democracy. So how would you get around that?
Just for my own personal situation.
Yeah.
I had my Facebook back in 2021 was the most followed and trafficked political Facebook in the country. I was getting more views on my posts than the Prime Minister and the opposition leader were at the time. The ABC actually did a segment about it, and I was trying to work out how preposterous it was. Here I was a backbencher, and I was getting all these views on Facebook, and there must be something, And they couldn't work out. They must have spent a fortune analysing. They went through and looked at the time that I was posting on my Facebook posts, and they did this chart and spreadsheet and analysis and graphs and things. Saying, Kelly's posting. He posts so often after midnight. But most politicians stop posting at 6 o'clock at night. 5 o'clock at night. And Kelly's, he must have some secret thing he's doing. No, I was just up late working my backside off, and that's when I get a lot of things coming through from America from the day. So as it came in, I was up late at night working on a bit of a night owl at times. And they thought this was this big expose they did on it, about what. So my Facebook page was actually suspended. I had over 100. This is like a couple of years ago. I had over 100,000 people find my Facebook page, the largest political page in the country. And Facebook, and it was the Morrison government, I believe, interfered in it. They actually suspended, obliterated it, set fire to it. If it was a book, they burn it. And I had photos, personal photos, family mementos and photos on there I thought would always be safe from there, all wiped and destroyed.
That is disgraceful. Zuckerberg is disgraceful because he does the government's bidding.
Yeah. So at the last election, I'm leading the United Australia Party. I'm prohibited from having a Facebook page. And yet the other parties I'm competing against, they are free to have Facebook pages. And then I found out after the election from Freedom of Information requests, both the Department of Health and the Department of Home Affairs had written to Twitter multiple times, and this is the old Twitter prior to Musk, demanding that my Twitter page be taken down. So here I am, an elected member of Parliament, right, sitting in Parliament, elected member, and bureaucrats in Canberra were secretly writing to Twitter overseas, calling for Twitter to take my page down and to censor me. And even the old Twitter, I was very careful at what I posted on Twitter because I knew I couldn't afford to lose both. And so basically I was self-censoring. So there was a member of Parliament self-censoring myself. And even when I would stand up in the federal Parliament, right, I'm giving a speech in Parliament, I'd have to think, if I say certain things, I can't post it to any of the social media platforms.
This is communist. This is communist China.
And then we had YouTube. YouTube started to censor my parliamentary speeches. So I would stand up in the federal Parliament, right, and I'd put nothing where they'd say, the speaker would say, I give the call to the member for Hughes. And it'll be nothing more than that, than me speaking in Parliament with full parliamentary privilege until the end when I say I thank the House and that's it. Cut. Nothing else, no added commentary, straight the videos from the parliamentary, the parliamentary film bank or whatever they do it, right? YouTube went and censored a whole lot of them.
Wow.
So we had a foreign company, right, that are dominating Australia's media and what we can hear, censoring elected members of parliament, right? We had government bureaucrats writing and trying to pressure Twitter to censor me, right? And Twitter actually wrote back to them from the freedom of and said, no, we can't see he's broken any of the rules. Right? So they were making up false allegations about me, saying I'd broken Twitter's rules. Twitter, and this is the old Twitter, under what's the bloke's name with the beard that used to run the place?
Yes, yes, he's as forgettable as all of them, all those billionaires.
The old
Don't worry,
Twitter,
they contribute nothing.
But they even said, no, we can't see he's broken any of our rules.
Yeah.
Right? So this is the censorship that we had here and around the world about elected government officials being censored if they were talking about the narrative. Now, that's one thing I think we need, a legislation we need in place.
Absolutely.
We've got to recognise that today's large social media platforms are the equivalent of the old common carrier, right? And where you have regulations, the common carrier regulations that they can't. So it used to be on the transport. You can't reject people's. You can't. Say, "I'm sorry, man, I'm not going to carry your goods." Right?
Yes.
Right. It should be a similar provision to that recognition, and these platforms should not be able to censor lawful speech.
Yes.
So I'd say the law should be something. So remember, they get special protections because they say we're not publishers, we're platforms. So they get special legal protections before that, right? Now, if you want to enjoy those special legal protections where you are, so you can't be, if someone, for example, okay, a newspaper, if I write a letter to the newspaper and I defame someone, the newspaper print it, the newspaper are liable for the defamation claim, right?
Because they printed it.
They print it, right? If I post something to a platform, right, that is defamatory, the platform is not liable as the publisher of the newspaper was, because they are a platform, not a publisher. So that gives them this protection, this legal protection. Right? Now, if you're going to enjoy that legal protection, you should not be able to go around and censor the free speech, lawful free speech, right, in the political debates of others. And if you do that, that's where there should be heavy fines, and you should
particularly at the behest of one particular political cohort who simply want to silence their opponents. I mean, you have been through hell. Craig, how do you keep so resilient? What keeps you going? Give us a little bit of who is Craig Kelly. What inspired Craig Kelly to do this? What?
Ex-rugby player, ex-front row in rugby sort of thing. So all your Kiwi friends would know when you pack your head in a rugby scrum sort of it does. And that's in the old days before they have this now, touch, crouch, pause thing that the new rules have. So I played in the days where you stood back and you went whammo like that, against giant men from Samoa sort of thing. So that sort of certainly toughened me up a little bit, and I've survived through that. I can survive through some of these attacks in the media and in politically wise. So,
what drew you to politics, Craig? What motivated you?
Look, I'd always had an interest in politics, but I got a particular interest in the early 2003, 2004 in our competition law policies. And I thought what the Liberal Party were doing at the time was against what was to the benefit of their traditional constituency, small business.
Yes.
And I studied very much the US competition laws, from things called the Clayton Act, the Robertson-Patman Act, and how the US really in those early part of the last century really were set laws to make sure we want to have not a quality of outcomes, but a quality of opportunity for people to enter in the small field of business.
Yes.
And be able to compete against it. But some of the speeches from that time were truly inspiring. You listen to Teddy Roosevelt and a guy called Wright Patman, and you read old political speeches, and truly inspiring how they really believed in individual rights and freedoms. And
Theodore Roosevelt is wonderful. His speeches are so good to read.
And there was a study, there was a book I read, it was called Reap What You Sow or something. It was a study in the 1930s, and they looked at two towns in central California. And they were identical, like they had the same rainfall, the same climate, they had the same soils, they had the same population size, right? They had the same economic output. But what they found was different was one of these towns was all owned by small individual proprietors, small individual business people. Right? The other town was owned by a couple of large corporations where everyone was sort of like tenant farmers. And even though everything seemed the same, the town that was controlled or had all the small business people in it, they said everything they could measure by social standards, from the amount of crime to the amount of children out of wedlock. They back into this to the number of parks, municipal parks, the number of sporting organisations, and theatres and newspapers. Everything, life was superior in that town where there was more small entrepreneurs and small business people in it, and that was because of that great, the American tradition of that early term of the last century, that actually broke up and allowed the individual business person to have equality of opportunity and to compete in the marketplace. And if I look at the long draw of history, if I compare that to Germany, the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, Germany had this centralisation and concentration of industry. Germany had never had these laws to protect equality of opportunity. So I think when you went into those First and Second World Wars, that is the reason why you had you had this centralised control power in Central Europe, where it was done by a couple of big companies that were controlling everything. And in America, you had these massively diversified economies with all these small business people all looking after their own interests and interests of the country. And that really sort of was my real political awakening of why I want to become involved in politics, to make sure that we put here in Australia laws that we didn't have that the US did, that made sure we gave the small businessman a fair crack. No, not a leg up or a handout or any special advantages or subsidies like we see the economy running today. Just give them equality of opportunity. And if you do that and you have a free society, you'll create a far, far better society. And that was why I believe, and that's why I put my hand up to run for politics and joined the Liberal Party. Won an election under Tony Abbott in 2010. Then we formed government in 2013. And then after that, I saw a real collapse where they got rid of Tony, they ditched Tony Abbott. The lefties took control of the Liberal Party. They signed up to all these international treaties. They signed up against what we took to the election campaign. They signed up to the Paris Treaty. They signed us up to net zero. And then
and was it as in New Zealand with zero consultation with the people, not even telling us what they were going overseas to sign? Did you have the same?
The good one. In 2019, Scott Morrison's the Prime Minister. We go to the 2019 election campaign with a policy that we are against, not in favour of net zero. That's it. We win the election campaign. Turn up in the party room one day. The Prime Minister standing up in front. He's just got back from Glasgow, one of the open meetings. He says, "We've decided to sign up to the net zero." I'm going, hang on. The bloke I'm sitting next to, he's now the shadow treasurer. I've got, mate, Angus. I said, mate, did I go out did I miss this debate? Did I go out for a bathroom break and miss this? Right? It was just imposed upon the Liberal Party and the country without discussion and without any consultation that we were signed up to this stuff. And by this, it was far too late. It was the same with all the COVID stuff. Again, we were being dictated to and rolled out and all these things. I'd stand up in the party room and argue. Originally, it was on the issue of allowing doctors to administer hydroxychloroquine. Now, we had here in Queensland a situation where the Queensland she's now the Queensland governor. They promote all these people. They give them awards and promote them all for the disasters that they've been involved, right? She was the chief health officer of Queensland. And she
What's her name?
Janet Young. Right?
Oh, yes, I've heard
if you'd like to sue me, I'd like to be very interested, right? What she did, she wrote so she had the power under the Queensland state government legislation, and she criminalised any doctor prescribing hydroxychloroquine that they would face 6 months in jail. This is
that is extreme.
So I'm talking to people like Dr. Zelenko over in New York. What a wonderful man who's now passed, right? Yeah. Talking to Dr. Peter McCullough, other great doctors like Dr. Pierre Corey, Dr. Brian Tyson, and these guys are actually practicing at the coalface. We didn't have a lot of our COVID waves came later. These guys are at the coalface. They're using hydroxychloroquine, combining it with zinc and azithromycin, right? Speaking to me firsthand, telling me the wonderful success that they have. Right? And I've got some of the highest qualified medical professors in this country ringing me, saying this hydroxychloroquine works, right? Keep going. And this Jeanette Young in Queensland decided, I don't know what evidence, that she would make it a criminal jail sentence for a doctor to prescribe hydroxychloroquine. Something was completely legal otherwise. So doctors are allowed to prescribe that drug off-label for other things. So it was a completely legal activity. And I've got these doctors ringing me going, this is insane.
Yes.
It's never happened before. Why am I not able to prescribe this? I'm talking to these doctors overseas, and they said, it's not just it's saving people's lives. And this woman, this Jeanette Young, decided that she knew so much. Not only did she know so much better, and she was so enlightened, that she was going to make it a criminal offence. So I wrote an open letter, and I put her on notice that what she was doing should be held for crimes against humanity in the future.
Excellent.
I linked half a dozen of the latest studies. I said, here you are. You can see you have no justification whatsoever of not only banning this drug, but criminalising its prescription. So it's a criminal offence for both the doctor and the chemist to prescribe it. I said, and madam, I put in my open letter, in years to come, you'll be held to account for crimes against humanity. And what did they do? They promoted her to Governor of Queensland.
Oh, my goodness. Did you ever get a reply to that letter?
No, I didn't get a reply. I was called out on how terrible, how shocking it was. A guy called George Christensen, who was also a member of Parliament at the time, he co-signed it with me. He was a member up in Queensland. Right?
I know George a little bit. I've spoken to him on the phone.
And we were chastised and attacked in the media and in Parliament. How dare we, even question this, this noble woman that's the Chief Health Medical Officer in Queensland. And who are we to question it, right? I would never, ever express my medical opinion. I'd always reference it by a quote from Dr. Peter McCullough, a quote from Dr. Pierre Corey, a quote from Dr. Zeb Zelenko, right? A direct quote from doctors that were using this drug at the coalface and was showing that none of their patients were dying. None. Right?
And Craig, this madness continues. A dear friend of mine, Dr. Bruce Dooley, who exposed the Federation of State Medical Boards, which rules medical boards and councils around the world. He exposed that with me 2 years ago. He has just lost his practicing license here in New Zealand for what? Among other things, prescribing ivermectin, the other branch of absolute logical treatment. And so that was only a week or so ago. This madness continues. Is it continuing in Australia?
A quick story about ivermectin. So I was having all these doctors around the world telling me hydroxychloroquine is something that should be, and I'm not saying you should take it. It should be your choice between you and your doctor.
It's a Nobel Prize winning treatment.
It's what I call, it was the sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship.
Exactly.
And in a free society, that sanctity of the doctor-patient relationship is one of those fundamental pillars of a free society. Yes. That you go into your doctor's surgery, you close the door, right? You have a private discussion, you rely upon your doctor, his skill and his experience and his expertise in practicing the art of medicine.
And his listening to the patient, his listening.
Now, what we had during COVID, we had a government bureaucrat sitting in that same room during these times, right? And if the doctor said something the government bureaucrat disagreed with, well, that doctor was struck off and lost everything. Now, when it came to ivermectin, I was battling away, and I became basically person non grata down in Canberra. So the parliamentary week went from Monday to Thursday, and Wednesday was party night was sort of like a good way to describe it. They're all every Wednesday night, there were all functions and events and bits and pieces that everyone could go on. Because most people, you had Parliament on Thursday, and everyone took off back to their home states on the the Thursday night. So Wednesday nights they're going out, right? And normally Wednesday night you'd have half a dozen invitations, and you juggle. So I'll go to this. I'll call on this for a pre-dinner drink, and I'll have an entree at this one, and maybe a main here, and I can go to 4 events sort of thing, right? During that period, all my invitations dried up, none, right? Zero, right? So my Wednesday nights, all my colleagues are out at all these sort of swish functions in Canberra. I used to go and order a pizza from one of the local pizza joints and sit in the car and do a few things on my Twitter account, right? And reply to a few emails. And I'm sitting there one night on a cold Canberra night, sitting waiting for pizza to cook right by myself. The phone rings. And it's Professor Tom Barodi, one of the pure medical geniuses, that save billions of the discoveries he's made over years, save billions of dollars and save thousands of lives, right? A medical genius, right? Almost a savant. He rang me and he said, Craig, he says, mate, you're 100% correct on that hydroxychloroquine. I said, Professor, can you give me some air cover? Can you come out and say some statements? And he said to me words which he said, never forget, he said, it's dirty. I said, Professor, what do you mean it's dirty? He says, the media have vilified it so much that I don't think it's recoverable because of what the media have done. He said to me, I reckon, he said, I believe I could get the same or better results with ivermectin and zinc than we can get with hydroxychloroquine. I said, what's never heard of it, what's ivermectin before? And then he explained it to me, and explained to me the mechanisms of working. Now it's a zinc ionophore, how you combine it with the zinc and it gets into the cells. This is exactly what Dr. Zelenko told me, what Dr. McCullough told me, all these other medical geniuses that explained to me. So, well, that makes sense. Well, surely you've got to be allowed to prescribe, ivermectin. I said, well, how's it safety? And he says, it says perfectly safe apart from for collie dogs. You don't give it to collie dogs, was the thing, right? He says, like, Nobel Prize winning, it's got 30 years of safety history, right? One of the safest drugs we've got, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Then lo and behold, I mentioned that, it's misinformation, right?
Yes.
And then all these studies started to come out. Show it's effective. It's reducing mortality 40%, reducing cases 40, 50%, study after study after study. The first 20 studies were all favourable to ivermectin. And what happened? We had the TGA here in Australia one day decided that they would prohibit doctors from prescribing ivermectin for COVID. And that decision by that TGA, I believe, has led to tens of thousands of unnecessary deaths in this country. It was a criminal act that caused death. And these people must be held to account for what they did.
I mean, that is sobering. The TGA is the Therapeutic Goods Authority?
Yes. So they're the equivalent of, so they basically regulate all the medicines and the doctors, right? So if you're bringing in, are
they like the NIH in America?
They're the ones that kick off on the vaccines, right?
Yeah.
They're the ones that tell us, yes, are all safe and effective and things. And the head of the TGA is a guy called Skerritt. And I remember he came into the government party room one day and I said, look, Professor, I says, how can you guarantee these things? How can we be saying they're safe and effective when there is no long-term safety data? And he said to me, don't worry about that. He says, 28 days, any adverse event after 28 days, almost you don't have to worry about it. I said, well,
He said that?
He said that in the party room, right? And
that is so cavalier.
That's right. He said 28 days, all the adverse events show up. We don't have to worry about that. I'm saying, I'm thinking to myself, well, that doesn't seem right. Right?
I was on an interview the other day with Pierre Corey and Paul Marek, and there was a registered nurse from America who was telling the audience that she is on her, it was over 1,500 days of producing spike protein every single day in her body. Every single day. And the thread was full of people saying, yes, I've had longer than that. And this is what these professors who've sold out to the big pharma narrative are doing. And they're still doing it. They're still denying it.
What wonderful men, Pierre Corey and Professor Paul Marek. I've met both. If I was in the trenches or if I was in the front row of a rugby scrum, there are a couple of blokes who I want beside me because I know they wouldn't take a backward step, sort of thing. But they were truly wonderful, men.
They really are amazing and helping so many jab injured. And Pierre said there's only so much he can do every day. Speaking of helping things heal, or actually, I don't quite know where to categorize this. There was a story you put out. We did mention the climate con. We've mentioned the COVID con. There was a story you put out that was deeply moving in front of an absolutely raped and ruined tree that should have been sacred to the people of Australia. Can you please tell that story? I had friends from Australia sending me that, so upset seeing you stand in front of it. It was a magnificent tree. Give us the background to that, Craig.
Okay. Thursday, the 10th of April, 2025. And I'm down here in what used to be a part of our beautiful Snowy Mountains National Park that's been desecrated, smashed, bulldozed in the name of renewable energy and saving the planet. These are the transmission lines that need to hook up to the white elephant of Snowy 2.0. So today, while Mr. Bowen and Mr. Dutton and Mr. Albanese and Tanya Plezovic, our Environment Minister, are out kissing babies, they should be down here to have a look at what their policies of net zero are doing to the Australian bushland, are doing to the Australian native forests. No point hiding up in their electorates in inner Sydney, inner Brisbane and inner Melbourne. They should be down here having a look at the devastation that their policies are causing. Labor and Liberal are no different. This destruction is on both their heads. So here's a challenge to you, Mr. Albanese and Mr. Dutton. Come down here before the election, bring them your media buses down here, show them what is happening, and try and defend your policies of net zero that are not only wrecking our economy, but are wrecking our great Snowy Mountains as well. Look at this magnificent tree next to me. It must be over 100 years old. Chopped down, felled, and it'll be taken down completely to build these transmission lines. Where are the environmentalists? Where are the greenies that care about our forest? This is the madness of the climate change agenda right here before your very eyes. There's a project, the Snowy Mountains in Australia is considered iconic. Remember the film The Man from Snowy Mountains, and we had what was called the Snowy Mountains Hydro Scheme, where thousands and thousands of migrant workers came out from Europe, engineers and workers in all sorts of fields to build what was actually the Snowy Mountains scheme, which was a hydroelectric scheme. So it's iconically known in Australia. Okay?
And the film was Man from Snowy River.
The Man from Snowy River and the House of the Brumbies. Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, back in 2017, came up with a scheme. He called it Snowy 2.0, right? You have that like 2.0 as makes it thing, right? And what this was a pumped hydro scheme. So the scheme was to pump water. You have two dams. You have a high dam and a low dam, right? The scheme was to pump water 27 kilometres, right? Now, most of these pump hydro schemes, it's a kilometre or less, right? 27 kilometres uphill to the top dam, and the top dam releases the water, it spins the turbines, it flows down to the bottom dam, and then you pump it up again, right? Okay. Firstly, the project is totally inefficient because you need 3 units of energy to pump the water uphill to get 2 units out. So every 2 units of energy you deliver to the grid, you lose 1 unit of energy in the friction of the water being pumped uphill, right?
These people are so incompetent.
Right? So this scheme was originally going to cost $2 billion for the tunnelling work and the dam work, and $2 billion for the new transmission lines, which you had to put new transmission lines in to connect it up. So the original cost was all up $4 billion. So I, at the time, I was the chairman of the Coalition Backbench Committee on Energy, and that was so. And I was also the Parliamentary Committee on Energy, and I had it took me years to learn because it's a very complicated area. It took me years of learning and travelling around. I travelled all around the world to try and understand how these things work. And I did my calculations on the back end, and they wouldn't give us the full business case. So here I am, elected member of Parliament, chairman of the Coalition Backbench Committee, meant to be saying, "Oh, this is a wonderful, wonderful project," right? They wouldn't even give us the full business case. They gave us like a one-page summary with a few numbers on it about how it can work. Now, you took that one-page summary in about 3 or 4 minutes on the back of a drinks coaster, you could work out this project didn't stack up. It would have made electricity much more expensive. So that was at $4 billion of cost.
And this is how they treat our elected representatives. So you're meant to go out to ABC and spout those facts when you haven't even been able to
They
do the
wouldn't.
proper
They said,
study?
it's all commercial in confidence, right?
Oh, ridiculous.
Yeah. This project is now north. Originally, was now north of $20 billion. Right? These tunnel boring machines. I remember saying to the guy who was running the station, I said, mate, you've got to drill 27 kilometres under a national park through some of the hardest rock known to mankind. This hard granite, you know. I said, mate, I said, isn't that thought? He said, no, mate, no problem, mate, don't worry, should be right, mate, don't worry. The thing went, I think, a couple of 100 metres and got jammed and stuck and was stuck in soft sand for months and months and months, and they're years behind. The project's years behind. It's now blown out from $4 billion when it didn't make any economic sense to $20 billion. Now, part of this, right, they've got to put new transmission lines through the Snowy Mountains National Park to be able to get the energy to pump the water up the hill, right? So they need 3,000 megawatts of energy to pump the water up the hill at full speed. Now, to give you an idea, New South Wales' entire grid, right, at the peak time takes about 10,000 megawatts of electricity. This will need 3,000 megawatts of electricity. I don't know the exact numbers from New Zealand, but I don't know whether New Zealand at times would use 3,000 megawatts of electricity, right? That's how much power this thing needs to pump the water up the hill. So they've got to knock this corridor through the national park to build the transmission lines. Anyhow, I'd seen some photos online about where I think this is going to be an ecological disaster. So I made a bit of a trip down there with a couple of other Libertarian guys. We jumped in the car, it's about a 5.5-hour drive from Sydney, and said, look, let's go down a bit of a spec. So I felt like I might have a bit of egg on my face if we got down and we couldn't see anything. And you could not believe it. The destruction. It is a corridor about 180 metres wide, cut for miles and miles and miles through this national park. And just it looks like a squadron of B-52 bombers that have come through and levelled the place, absolutely levelled the place. And there was a couple of big trees. When I say trees, they were the stalk of the tree. They chopped the top off, they chopped the bottom down. And I did a video filming myself under there. People said, you can't even see. The tree was so big, people said they watched the video several times. They didn't realise I was standing at the base of the tree and talking.
How old do you think a tree like that was, Craig?
I guessed, I looked at, I said, I guess this is 100 years old. So I didn't know. You just see the size of it, the massive size. So afterwards, I asked a few people, is anyone expertise in this area? Can they estimate how old this tree would be, given the size of the trunk? And the trunk at 40 metres high was still well over a metre in diameter. And they estimated somewhere between 250 and 350 years old.
Oh,
so that tree was growing when Captain Cook sailed and circumnavigated New Zealand and sailed up our eastern seaboard. That tree was growing in our Snowy Mountains National Park, and they bulldozed the thing and destroyed it for this madness of this Snowy 2.0 project. I understand at times that, yes, sometimes you've got to make some compromise on national parks or mining sites and things that would create wealth, but this is still a project that will destroy energy. Remember, every 3 units of energy you ship into the place, you only get 2 out. You destroy 1 unit of energy.
Is this a project pushed by the Greens for net zero, for all of the green policy?
It was pushed by the Liberal Party for net zero.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
It was pushed by, it was a Liberal Party idea, or the Liberal Party, and I got into trouble at the time off the Prime Minister for saying, this thing's a destroyer of energy. And I couldn't, the numbers was just ridiculous. And yet this thing is going ahead. And funny, down there, I bumped into a couple of the guys that were sort of like working on the project. And I sort of like a bit, you guys are earning $1 out of it. I respect that, So, and they said to me, we can see the total absurdity of this, but it's a good earn.
This
is one of these projects to do with these renewables all around the country that are decimating our beautiful national parks and natural wildlife, to construct these wind turbines and to construct these transmission lines. And they see these things are good for the environment. Yeah.
At some point, even the people on the far left must look at this and say, this does not add up. I mean, we talked about small businesses before, and you were saying a town with a lot of small businesses, decentralized, will flourish. You look at the COVID policies, Craig. What did the COVID policies do to the mum and dad businesses in Australia and New Zealand? What did they do?
That's what the small businesses would close down, but the large retail shops would stay open.
Yes.
That was, how
the churches were shut, but the bottle stores were left
that's
open.
That's right.
At some point, you have to look and say there is something seriously wrong. So let's go through this. What can Australians, I just want to be quite practical now.
Right.
What can Australians do? We're going to swing right back to my first question, therefore, and say, this is mum and dad family, and we've got 3 kids, and we want some really good policies to vote for. You gave us free speech.
Okay,
And that's going to get me voting for you. What else have you got to offer?
Secondly, we want to scrap this nonsense of net zero and pull out of all these international treaties, pull out of all these Paris treaties, right? Because they are forcing up the price of electricity. Right?
Would you pull out of the UN? Would you pull out of the WHO?
Absolutely. Pull out of the World Health Organization. Maybe there's an argument to stay in the UN and but not be combined by it, right? But definitely pull out of the World Health Organization.
You don't think it's corrupt? The UN is showing signs of
absolutely
rottenness to the core.
We look we need we need the UN to be efficient and working in the best interest of the globe. But unfortunately, it's been captured by a lot of globalists. These IPCC, the World Health Organization. These are separate groups that are spin-offs of the UN that we should be out of.
And DOGE is showing that NGOs, non-governmental organizations, are an absolute disaster, and they run a lot of the world.
So if we get rid of these net zero policies, we get rid of this Paris Treaty, we can end all the subsidies. Now, at the moment, there are billions of dollars every year of subsidies that go in to subsidising the construction of these wind turbines and the destruction of our environment and these large solar farms. Get rid of the lot, right? There's about $3 or $4 billion in subsidies, and they keep adding subsidies on top of the subsidies, right? Now they want another couple of $1 billion of subsidies for people to put batteries in their home, right? It just goes on and on and on. Get rid of the lot, right? You've got to start constructing coal-fired power stations because we've got an ageing fleet of coal-fired power stations. That's going to take a while to come on. I say we should repeal our ban against nuclear power, but I don't agree with the Liberals that we should be building nuclear power stations today. I was the only member with a nuclear reactor in this electorate. I had the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor was part of my electorate. My office was like 5 kilometres away, so I was a regular visitor there and was able to learn a lot from the people that ran the nuclear science. I wouldn't be building today's generation of I wouldn't be signing up to spend government money to build today's generation of nuclear power. What I'd like to see, let's get the coal-fired power stations' life extended, let's some more coal-fire back in, and let's invest our money or resources in developing the next generation of nuclear power. There's so many great prospects of small modular nuclear reactors. And we as Australia, have the largest deposits of uranium in the world, we should aim not just to be exporting the uranium, we should aim within 25, 30 years, quarter of a century or more, to be the number one nation when it comes to nuclear technology. And to do that, you've got to get rid of these nonsense bans on nuclear power stations to attract the best minds around the world to come into this country and to work on developing the next generation of nuclear technology, which we said in 20, 30 years, quarter of a century or much, then we can roll that out down the track. So that's what I would be doing when it comes to, and if you do that, if you get that energy price under control, remember we used to be on par with the USA when it comes to the cost of electricity. We are now 2 and 3 times the price of the USA. So we've got businesses and industry leaving Australia all the time because it's too expensive to make anything here in the country. That is putting the electricity, not only your consumer bill that you pay, it puts the price up of everything in the supermarket, it puts the price up of everything you buy, it pushes up the price of housing construction. Energy is just such a fundamental issue in our modern society that you've got to make sure that you're doing things that have low cost generation of electricity at the cheapest possible price. And we've got this nonsense policy. There's a bloke called Chris Blackout Bowen here. He's the energy minister. Hang on. Still got me? He's the energy minister. And he goes on, renewables are cheaper. Right? Well, when you add up all the costs, when you add up the cost of the intermittency, because these things, sun doesn't shine, there's no electricity, wind doesn't blow, there's no electricity. So you've got to back them up 100%. And then you've got to spend all these extra money on these transmission lines to put them in. When you add all those things in, they're a lot more expensive. And that's why the more renewables in the grid, the higher the prices go. We've seen that everywhere in the world. It's happened here in Australia. So that would be, I say, like, but not a second major policy. To get the.
I mean, I'm listening to you on the nuclear. As a mother, it's still a no. I think you're going to have trouble winning the women over on that. I remember interviewing a doctor who said the area around those nuclear plants often show much more leukemia in children. There are many things that need to be straightened out, including how do you ever legislate for human mistakes, and when it's something like nuclear power and the risks are so great if there's a human error. But you see, Craig, here it is. We're having a civilized discussion with different viewpoints. And wouldn't it be great to have this on national television where you can actually hear both sides of the argument and then the people decide, well, there's enough, as you say, maybe in this new generation of nuclear energy to trust it. Let's do a few and see how they go. One of my big things is Bill Gates is promoting it, and anything Gates promotes I know is bad for the planet and bad for my family's health.
Very, very
so
true.
there's a big red flag there.
So I'm against rolling out today's generation of nuclear technology based on the costs and based also, it's not going to give us any competitive advantage, right?
Yes. Everything
we do in business and in life, we've got to try and leverage our nations or individuals or businesses or families. What is our competitive advantage? Now, we really don't. If we're going to buy, get the Koreans or the Americans or the French or whoever to come and build us nuclear power stations, that doesn't give us any competitive advantage. Using that black coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard, that gives our nation a competitive advantage.
Yes.
That helps just to be a rich and prosperous nation, especially compared to other countries.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. When I differed in your view, do you know what I noticed there? You're a very good listener. Do you like listening? Do you like listening to other views?
I must admit, sometimes in this job, I said sometimes you need to carry a big spear, and you've got to. Sometimes you need to be, very. I would say you take the ball up and be very aggressive sometimes in this game.
Absolutely. But often people just don't know how to listen in the political game. And that's a skill that you need to, really treasure. So your third policy, what else can you sell me? I'm still thinking about who I'll vote for.
Okay. We have a huge issue in this country. We have a housing affordability crisis. Right? One of the things that I grew up with, what we call the Great Australian Dream, as where kids would grow up and they would believe that they could own part of this country, right? You'd have your own backyard, where you could, you throw a rugby ball, kick a rugby ball, or throw a cricket ball or something, right? And that was considered the Great Australian Dream that people aspired to. And my generation, my parents' generation, we were able to, basically to buy a house, and my parents were able to buy a house on one income, buy a nice house in the suburbs and enjoy a good lifestyle, right? Now, because of excessive rates of migration,
yes,
that great Australian dream has been destroyed for an entire generation of kids. Housing affordability is a major crisis in this country. Rents have gone up extraordinarily, so it pushes the rents up. So people that are renting and trying to save to buy a house now find they don't have a penny left after they pay the rent, and then they look at the housing prices and they're going up and up and up and up and up. That's it, and they just give up.
Yes.
Give up. I can't. And when you do that to your society, when you tell a generation of young kids at school that you'll never be able, and they look at the numbers, you'll never be able to own your own home. You'll never be able to call part of Australia or New Zealand some piece of dirt your own. You completely fundamentally change the structure of society. And that is what we are doing in both our countries. Right? This is where you get the 15-minute cities, government control, everything. Was it that you'll own nothing and you'll be happy?
Yes,
that's where they're heading us, right?
Klaus Schwab of WEF.
Yep. So we've got to get, the Labor Party put forward, It's all a problem with housing construction, right? We can build more houses. Let's build more, right? If you look at the data, Australia is a world champion at building houses, right? I think there's only one other country in the world, I think it's Switzerland over the last decade, that has built more houses per capita than Australia. Right? So we are world champions. The problem is not supply of houses. The problem is excessive demand. And we have had, over the last 3 years of government, we have had a net migration rate. So that's after the people you take away the people that sort of migrate out of Australia. We've had a net migration rate of over 1.3 million people enter the country in the last 3 years. And that is completely, utterly unsustainable. Those rates of migration need to be, net migration need to come down substantially, almost to net zero, right? Which means you still have people, there's still room to migrate people into the country. So you've got people leaving. So if you have a shortage of doctors or professionals or abattoir workers, you can still bring those people into the country. Right? But you've got to have almost a net zero migration to allow our infrastructure and to allow our housing to catch up with the population increase that we've had. Right? And part of that, we've got to then also, we've got to strengthen our regional areas. So we've got to make it, we have this great centralisation in the capital cities of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. We've got to strengthen our regional areas with faster transport links so young people can actually have a real viable option. If you're growing up in Sydney, that you can go and live in one of these regional towns, would be Nowra, or Bathurst, or Orange, or Newcastle, or Port Macquarie, or Goulburn. Right? And we strengthen these regional towns because we don't have any great shortage of land out there. And we can cut the place up, give people quarter-acre blocks. They can be 10, 15 minutes from the town centre, and they can have a great lifestyle. But at the moment, those places don't have the jobs. So you'd move every government bureaucratic department that you have to these regional areas. You'd try and strengthen these regional areas so you'd make sure that young Australians had the opportunity to own their own piece of dirt, own their own piece of this country in some of these strong regional towns.
And is that a libertarian policy? Is that very much a libertarian policy?
We have one of the policies we've got just yesterday. We were out looking at those in Sydney. You've got that Blue Mountains. So you've got the Blue Mountains, and when the first fleet arrived, for many years, the Blue Mountains were considered this impenetrable wall that you couldn't get through. And finally, was Blaxland, Lawson, and Wentworth found the track over the Blue Mountains and opened up the west of Western New South Wales. But at the moment, you've got sort of one road that winds its way up there, and it's 2 lanes each way, and it's what was normally like an hour and a half trip the other day took us like about 3 hours. If we could punch a tunnel, we have the tunnelling equipment today. It'll be expensive. We could punch a tunnel through those Blue Mountains and come out the other side, right? Which would cost us less than the Snowy Hydro 2.0 project, right? We'd be able to open up all those regional areas of Western New South Wales, right? You'd make the savings in transport costs. You'd make the road safety would be greatly improved. You'd improve the tourism. You take all that traffic out of the Blue Mountains, so it was only the tourism actually going to the Blue Mountains. Right? You could really invigorate the state. So transport links, strengthening those regional areas of the country, and getting the migration numbers down. So rather than bring the migrants in and then worry about the housing, right? Do the housing first, and whatever the housing is, that's what you set your migration rates at. Right?
And there's the issue, there's the rub. You look at the UK, at Ireland, and they're just being deluged. France, Germany, Spain, they're all being deluged with particularly Islamic migrants, and it's really destroying the societal fabric. And you think, why again has there been no consultation? So do you need to consult and ask Australians, do you want a whole lot more migrants, or do we just settle things down? I know in New Zealand, many of us just want things to stop, and we've just had Luxon go to India and say, any Indians who want to come here, and I've got dear Indian friends here, but I don't want a tsunami of them here. It's going to ruin our society. We can't cope. Our infrastructure can't cope, and Australia seems, in a way, similar. Your infrastructure is struggling, isn't it?
Well, that's a choice people get in election campaigns.
Yes.
If you think it's great, there's some people that love all these 1.3 million people. If you're a property developer, or if you've got, if you own 10 investment properties, you love the idea of all these people coming in, because that's going to push up the rental return you get, push up the property, your push up the value of your property portfolio. This is a wonderful policy. You know, good on your elbow. You know, 1.3 million. Why didn't you make it 1.5? That would help my property prices go even higher and higher and higher.
While I don't care about the future of my children's country.
Correct. And these people that think that they're going to easily pass their wealth on to their kids and grandkids through inheritance, just you watch these lefty socialists, if they get control of things, how they're going to bring in death taxes in the years to come.
Yes.
Right? So, you know, these people that often think that, you know, they think it's wonderful to them, just, you know, be careful with what you say. You reap what you sow. So,
and there's another added short-term gain, long-term loss for your family. What about tax? Where do you think the Australian tax levels are at? With these, and that ties in with the giant bureaucracies that are in Australia. Don't we both need, Australia and New Zealand, a Doge for our countries?
Absolutely. Look, I've worked in Canberra now for 12 years. Remember, before I got kicked out the last election, the 12 years in Canberra, and the waste, the expenditure, the waste, and especially coming from a small business background where you watched every cent, you did everything. You know, you watched what pens you bought. You know, your desk was like a bit of a masonite slab with a bit of fabric over it, sort of thing, and your drawers were a few old shoe boxes, sort of thing, and that did the job, right? To go to Canberra to see the waste that they spend, just the excessive spending. It's a lot of the guys that I used to be involved with. They had little businesses in the wood turners and people doing upholstery and metal spinners and people casting ceramics and metals and things and all these craftsmen. If they knew what was going on down in Canberra, I'll tell you what, they would have the pitchforks. They'd have the pitchforks out. So you've got our government spending is completely out of control.
How do you rein it in? How do you control that? Where do you start?
Firstly, you need to be ruthless. Okay, you need to, as I said, the ABC done.
Yes.
Right. So that one of the things that you do it. Okay, our e-safety commissioner and her mates defund gone. Sorry.
Is that American woman who's dictating to Australians?
Yes.
How can Australians put up with an American telling them what
she's the way? Yes. Oh, I will tell the Australians what they can say. I think, goodness gracious me, And,
talk about colonisation.
Yeah, and the one she said, she asked the question. She said, the World Economic Forum, there asked you a question. She said, "What do you think about the American Bill of Rights, the First Amendment?" She says, "Oh, I don't have to abide by that because Australia doesn't have a Bill of Rights, right? I abide by the Australian regulation that allows me to control what Australians can say." I'll tell you what.
She would be the first one out the door.
The first one guy, right? Don't come Monday. We'll send you stuff. We'll clean out your desk in a plastic bag, and we'll give us your post-boarding address for it, sort of thing. We'll empty it out. Don't even bother to come back. Look at the prices, the wage salaries we're paying these bureaucrats. Remember during COVID, I heard they said, Fauci was the highest paid US bureaucrat on $400,000 a year. Hang on, that's about the starting salary for many of these bureaucrats in Canberra. Right?
Wow.
400, 500, 600, 700, up to $1 million. We have the highest paid bureaucracy anywhere in the world. So Fauci's in charge. Fauci's what basically the health minister for the US. What's the national? Right? We've got a health minister in every separate state, and a federal health minister, and the head of the TGA, all on more than what Fauci was getting. So you've got all these bureaucracies completely and utterly out of control that have got to basically be cut down to size. So with the government department of efficiency. And they'll tell you there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that you could go through very, very quickly through the place, right? Now, once you do that, that allows you to firstly, you've got to get the deficits under control. Now, the Albanese government, right, this shocking, terrible government they've got, the budget they handed down before they called the election, they're planning to borrow over the next 4 years another $180 billion. So that's their plan. Right? We know from past efforts it's likely to be much worse than that.
This is on top of a mountain of debt. Let's just let Australians take that in, and the Australian children and grandchildren to come will be paying interest on that debt, let alone paying the principal on that debt.
Okay, so
It is It is just putting people
I've
into
got $1
penury.
billion notes.
Oh, wow.
Right? I
Yeah.
printed these up to try, and I printed 1,000 of these up, right?
Yeah.
There's $1 trillion, which is what our debt is going to be very soon, is $1,000 billion. That's where it's going. Now, Albanese is planning not doing another $180 billion worth of borrowing over the next 4 years, and all that simply means that is future high rates of taxation.
Yes.
Right? Government spending, right? Your taxation rate is what the government spends, not what they tax you. So all this money they're running up on the tab on the credit card, this simply means we must have higher taxation in the years to come. It has to be paid for. So we've got to pay the interest on the debt. So one of the biggest line items in the budget is not helping kids with disabilities or defence spending, right? Or hospitals or aged care or a pension, right? It's interest on the debt. Right? Basically paying just the interest, not paying any of it off, right? So every young Australian today that doesn't even get to vote in this election, when they get into the workforce, they're going to have to pay higher taxes because of this borrowing that Albanese and the Liberals are doing, and the Liberals got the same plan. So you've got to bring that deficit back to zero, and then
How do you do that, Craig? How do you do that?
That's why you have a dodge. That's why you say, sorry, ABC.
Yeah.
Your $1 billion. Sorry, guys. Raise it yourself.
Well, you know, in New Zealand, when the government wanted more money under Ardern, they just printed it. So I stood in the 23 election 11 weeks out. I thought, I'll stand because there's no one I want to vote for. And we really got a nice momentum going, although the Electoral Commission tried to slow us down as well. That's another story. But I just thought, well, if they've printed the money and put us in debt, we'll get in and I'll just fire up the printing machines, print a whole lot of money and pay it back. So it's just monopoly money with monopoly money.
The road to Zimbabwe, they call that.
Yeah, exactly. But I'll tell you what the key, I think, is, and I'd be interested in your views, the key is decentralization. I didn't stand to be part of a big bureaucratic centralized government. I said, if you put us in, and, you know, we may well have been cheated of votes. And once I saw the numbers, I thought, yeah, you know, you're just impossible to penetrate. We gave it a go. But I thought if we had got in, I would have said, let's decentralize. Let's have a tiny number of people in the central government just to coordinate the roads and the national hospitals and things, but everything else that will go back to towns and villages. Yes. And you will talk to your local mayor when you're in the cafe with him getting a coffee and say, mate, you haven't cleaned up that broken sewage down the road yet. Do your job. I'm paying you to do that. And that's how we keep a lean, mean bureaucracy and we keep an answerable leadership around countries. We must get rid of this centralized model.
That's right, Jellica. This centralized bureaucracy, it grows and grows and grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. It's almost like a self-fulfilling thing that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it generates, one lot of bureaucrats to check the paperwork of another lot of bureaucrats and so on sort of things. So you've really got to be ruthless with it. And, we're saying that. And we know that's going to cost us votes. And unfortunately, both the Liberal Party that should have done this job over the past decade simply failed to do so.
Yeah. And they want our countries on our knees. And so putting us in debt is one way to do it. Let's run through, to finish off, just some practical things. Now, I had a bit of a story from Australia when I was researching for this. There's a story bouncing around in the media that Clive Palmer's party, the Trumpet of Patriots, is doing deals with the Greens and the Teals, preferencing them over Liberals and Labor. What's your take on that? Have you heard anything about that?
I was previously, I was the leader of the United Australia Party at the last election.
And I don't know Clive Palmer from a bar of wood, but I will tell you from here, I did not like the way he treated you. I think you deserved a lot more respect and credit and deference, actually. That's not for me to tell anybody what to do, but I did not like seeing that because I thought he was very lucky to have you, Craig.
Just quickly, when I resigned from the Liberal Party over the COVID issues, my intent was to run as an independent at the next election. And Clive came to me and said, Craig, mate, that's selfish. You can't do that. There's too much at stake. We've got to try and put together a national movement and try and get people elected all across Australia. He said, mate, I'll back you with whatever it takes.
Which sounds wonderful. I thought he was a hero at the beginning.
And at the time, there were certain sort of promises and strategies sort of thing that were were made, and fortunately, they didn't sort of like come to fruition. But look, we certainly gave it our best shot. We had some wonderful people, but fortunately, it didn't work out. Then Clive, after the election, I thought I thought all our policies were right. I thought we've got a group of the most magnificent people that you never want to meet in your life. People that came from all walks of life and put their hand up and said, "I want to fight back against this."
Senator Babette, he's
yeah. Well, we had 150 Senator Babettes.
Wow.
And instead of trying to keep this network of people together, which I thought we'd be able to do for the next 3 years and run it into this election, Clive decided he would deregister the party. So he deregistered the party, and then at the last minute he decided he wanted to run again. So then he bought the name. He tried to buy. He couldn't, because he deregistered the party under the electoral laws. He couldn't use the name because he deregistered it. So he set up a new name, which he called it Trumpet of the Patriots. Now, I go and talk about that at meetings, and I'm people that are generally favourable to what he's saying, and they just break out laughing. The preference issues are always a tricky one for the minor parties, and what it appears that they have done. This is at the last election. We said, okay, how are you going to preference them? And we said, okay, should we preference Labor ahead of Liberal? Because you must, in the lower house, you've got to preference one above the other. You don't.
Yeah, just explain. Right? We don't have that in New Zealand. Okay. Explain the preference system, and it seems to smell of deal making and corruption. Okay. I don't like it. Do you like it? Do you endorse it?
I do, and I'll explain it.
Okay.
Okay. Say you've got 4 candidates, right? Say you've got a Freedom Party, a Labor, a Liberal, and a Green, right? This is in the lower house, right? So the ballot paper will have 4 people you can run, okay? You have to number every square. So you have to go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? If you just go 1 for the Freedom Party, your vote is considered invalid. So you have to number every square for your vote to be valid. So what that means, you have to make a decision whether you put Labor ahead of Liberal or Liberal ahead of Labor.
Yes.
Right? In the lower house, the upper house is a different story. The Senate, you don't have to preference. You can just preference 1 or 6 or whatever you like. You don't have to preference Labor. But in the lower house, you have to do it. So the question is, what order do you put these people in? Right? Now, at the last election, I suggested the best policy was to put your sitting member last. Right? Because in the lower house, none of George Christensen is someone that I would say no. I think I gave 1 or 2 exceptions. George Christensen shouldn't have been last because he stood with me. Another guy called Lou O'Brien shouldn't have been last because he stood up. But the rest of them, during COVID, when they should have been standing up, were hiding under their desks. So yes. To me, everyone that sat in that parliament between 2009 and 2022, they all deserve to be booted, with the exception of 1 or 2 people. So my suggestion was to put whoever your sitting member is, put them last and teach them a lesson, right? That you're not going to put up with this. And if the next election comes along, put your new sitting member last and keep putting your sitting member last to send a message it's not good enough. So that was the policy we took at the previous election. Now, Clive sort of appears to have done that at this election, but he appears to, look, a lot of good people, like there's a really good guy called Russell Broadbent, member down there in Melbourne that's been standing up and speaking out on these important issues. Right? They've preferenced the Labor and the Teals ahead of him. So I just,
what do you think? What do you think that might be about? Just the lust for power. The lust for power over.
It's just they haven't put enough, attention to detail. That's all. I think that's what. They had 150 seats. They haven't thought through it properly. They've rushed it through, without thinking each individual seat. Who is the sitting member? Another one, they appear to have mucked it up because with the redistribution, the sitting member now is actually slightly behind on the percentage votes because the boundaries have moved, and they appear to have preferenced the sitting member ahead of it. I think that's just a cock up. So look, it's.
What was the reason given to you for deregistering when you had such a good bunch of candidates and potentially you had his backup?
Look, it's a decision he made by himself. I think the reason was that he was concerned with all the AEC formality requirements. Okay? And yes, there are formality requirements, but we had to do that during the election campaign. And it would have been a couple of days' work, a day's work once a year. So it, maybe Clive he was upset with the AEC and thought this was some way of getting back to them, but it was a very disappointing decision that was made. But I said, look, it's up to him. He's paying the bills, so he gets to call the shots.
It's interesting, because I had a sense after I realised we really had been probably cheated out of large numbers, after a lot of people said we don't understand the numbers. We were the largest small party in the last election, but that was after only 11 weeks. But I still knew that we'd got more and that there'd been cheating. And I'd been to the Electoral Commission, but I decided to go to the people and say, we called it the party Loyal, let's make Loyal a people's movement, Craig. And I said, what we'll do at the next election is we will get a 1 million strong people's movement who will dictate to a party that's in there, we'll give you 1 million votes, but you have to vote for, get out of the UN, get out of the West. Yes. You have to make sure that there's never a forced jab again. We'd have a list of policies. And it seemed such a good idea. And I said in my message, we, the people, the smaller groups like this will never be given a seat at the major tables. Now, what that flushed out was a very dark group who'd actually wanted to take over Loyal. And luckily enough, we got Loyal cancelled, and they did not. They're very egoic. They're very power hungry. They epitomise everything that's bad about politicians. So in the end, it worked out well, but it was a very painful process to go through. But I had a specific strategy because, Craig, I don't know if we ever will be given a seat at the table, the real people. The game is so rigged.
Look, where the game is really rigged is in the mainstream media. Right?
Yes, yes.
It's very hard for the libertarian policies we get out to even get discussion in the mainstream media.
They don't even mention you. They only talk about the main parties, don't they? Right.
So they run it as a Dutton versus Albanese presidential contest.
That's so unethical. Unethical.
And we get squeezed out. Even Clive would probably spend $100 million, right? His party gets squeezed. Other than the advertising that he does. He gets squeezed out as well from the mainstream media. So unless you can have that, and then you've also got the last election I had to not get squeezed out from the mainstream media. I was being censored on the social media platforms at Blackband. And so, look, hopefully with Elon Musk, that gives us and I can see the social media platforms becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. I can see mainstream media becoming less and less relevant as time goes on. If you look at what's happened in a few other countries, look at the UK, for example, Farage with his Reform Party, even though they're fighting amongst each other, right? Terrible internal conflict amongst each other. A lot of polls are showing they're ahead of both the Conservatives and the Labor Party. We saw in those German elections where the minor party on the Conservative right did very well. So we've just got to keep fighting. We've got to keep sticking to our guns. We've got to keep advocating the policies because, and you wake up one person, it's hand-to-hand combat daily, one person. There's no magic bullet or magic video or something. A lot of people think, if I get this magic pamphlet out with all this information, it will crack the world open. It doesn't work like that. It's just steady, keep fighting on the issues, keep arguing the case, keep putting the history and the data together. And I'm probably optimistic, but we can see it's happening in the UK. I believe eventually we can turn this around. People will come across and support more and more of the minor parties. And we can start off here in our Australian system, or at least getting some of the more senators elected and give the balance of power in the Senate. And
what do you think your great qualities are? Clearly a doggedness, clearly an absolute tenacity of the front row.
Stubbornness, is that what that's whether that's good or bad? I sometimes think I don't know the bad.
Do you love doing the work? Do you enjoy it?
I think skeptical.
Yes.
Whatever.
Critical thinker.
Yeah, well, I think I've learned quickly, whatever these government bureaucrats tell you, right? They're showing you, right? You got to remember, they're telling you bullshit. There's some, I've got a good nose for the bullshit. I think that's probably my, and look, before COVID, the Bureau of Meteorology here in Australia, the way they were dodging the data up and manipulating the data and rewriting history, it was just outrageous. And I could see as soon as COVID had, hang on, this is the same, order of person that's the Bureau that's now in all these government medical departments. Yes. They're saying this, and you can tell these people, you can tell them. I remember the first time Fauci came on the TV. It was 60 Minutes here in Australia. That I think it was an American piece that replayed it. It was like Lord Fauci and what a genius this Fauci was, and how we had to listen to him and how wonderful and so on. But I looked at the bloke and thought, mate, you wouldn't trust this bloke as far as you could throw him.
No.
Right? I would, and all these chief medical officers we had in Australia, you look at them, mate, I wouldn't let you put a Band-Aid on my little finger. And I remember talking to some of the high-ranking medical professors, the older guys, and one guy said, I know all these people in these government departments. He said, they were the dregs of my class. He said, lucky suddenly, we had to sort of get them through, we only got them through the other dregs. He said, anyone with any ability went into the private sector. He says, did really good. He said, but the people who basically failed and were incompetent all went into these government departments, and they're running the show.
Yes. Oh, we had that with our head of the Department of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, who was built up as a hero, this funny little skinny little man. And then someone said at a Christmas party with his friends near Rotorua, I think it was, it's funny the stories you hear and the little tidbits he put together. And he was talking to his friends and he said, well, it's gone pretty well. We may have had to lie a little bit. I mean, the whole thing was a lie. So just those indicators that these mediocre people know that they've done wrong, are willing to cover up. What preferences would you recommend then? What can you do that?
Yeah,
can you say,
sure.
yeah?
Now again, if we're successful in the Senate, right? So our preferences only flow if you're not successful, right?
Yes.
That's the first rule. So sometimes preferences get that. And the other thing is that very simple, but there's often people say, who are you giving your preferences to? Some people think that the parties actually, do some secret backroom deal and they sell the preferences, right? We only make recommendations. So the only person that gives the preference is the person that marks the ballot paper, and everyone does that individually, right? Even in my old seat of Hughes, right, the Greens used to preference me last, but I was the public enemy number one for the Greens, right? So they would preference me last, but I would still have about 15% of Green voters. They would preference me second, right?
Wow.
So the preferences you do it as you want. So I think
we don't have it here, but I was thinking Greens would be last, followed closely by Teals. But then it became a competition. But what about Labor and the Liberals? They all need to be last in my book.
The reason the preferential system I think is good because it allows you as a voter to have two bites of the cherry, right? So you could say, well, geez, I can't stand Albanese. There's no way I want him involved, right? Okay. And you think, but hang on a minute, it's better if the Liberal guy wins. But I don't really like this Liberal guy. He's got a lot of policies that I hate, right? But I like the Libertarians, right? I'm going to vote for the Libertarians. But if it's not a preferential system, the Libertarian, let's say, for example, the Labor guy might get 40%, right? The Liberal guy might get 35%, right? And the Libertarian might get 25%. So that means the Labor's won. But if the Libertarian vote and the Libertarians will hate the idea of this Labor candidate winning, if they combine their votes with the Liberals, the Liberal candidate would win. So the preferential system gives you the option to send a message to the major parties, right, that you're not happy with them, you're not happy with their policies, but to still decide that you don't want or you don't want to assist if it's the Albanese government.
Okay, now in my due diligence, I've also come across Queensland's a bit of a mess because a hero to many of us is Dr. William Bay. And somehow the Libertarians have not supported Dr. William Bay. He's at the end of the ballot. And I had calls today from people saying, it's not right. That's not good what's going on up there. What's going on? Are the Libertarians playing dirty? Because he should be getting in. He cares about the people.
Okay, firstly, the Libertarians are a state-based. We're a state-based organisation. So every state actually has slightly different emphasis on different policies. We're the Libertarians in Victoria, a little bit different from the Libertarians in New South Wales, a bit different from the Libertarians in Queensland and so on, right? And each state makes its own decisions on where its preferences go, okay? The only reason I could think of, I think William Bay's running for a party called, and I've stood beside Dr. Bay at rallies up in Queensland, right, when he was and we had those rallies outside one of the medical board offices sort of thing. I was up there in Queensland rallying with him. So I've been a a big.
And he won his lawfare case.
Correct.
It's given so many people hope.
Correct.
Such a courageous man.
Correct, right. Now, he at the last minute decided to run with what's called the Great Australia Party. Right? Now, also in the Senate in Queensland, the way the vote works, as much as I love, William Bay and wish him all the best, he's not going to win. Right? That's the reality of the number of the Senate. You need a quota in the Senate is 14.3%, right? And so the reality of life is the Greens will get 1 seat, Liberals will get 2, Labor will get 2, and the 6th seat will be fought for amongst the Freedom parties. Now, that's Malcolm Roberts, who's done some wonderful work and is a good mate of mine. Jared Rennick has also been absolutely outstanding. I don't know whether you've seen much of his work in the attack of
He's extraordinary too.
Extraordinary. Okay. Jared got kicked out of the Liberal Party, right? They thought,
Yes.
we don't. You're too independent, Jared. We can't have independent thinkers like you. We want some toady. So they kicked him out, and they did this dodgy deal to kick him out. So I think Jared's got his own place. So you've got Malcolm Roberts, you've got Jared Rennick, then you've got Jim Wilmot for the Libertarians, right? So you've got 3 parties there, all fighting, and then you've got a party called Family First, right? That has been a little bit quiet, but the Family First name seems to attract a couple of percent on the ballot paper. Right? You've also got the Australian Christians as well, right? And then so on. So there's only, and you only have to number 6 parties above the line to do it. So the Libertarians in Queensland would have looked at it and decided that the top 6, right? And they also wouldn't have wanted the votes to expire, because your vote in the Senate, if the parties you vote for all get knocked out, your vote expires and gets thrown in the bin. And so they probably would have put the number 6 into a party that was likely to win, that the vote wouldn't expire. Right? So that would be the reason why, and because you can number, they wanted to number 6 to keep it to 6. That's what you have to do under the Electoral Act, and they would have looked at the 6, and they would have thought, look, as much as we love, William Bay, that with the other, because he's only with that, and the Gap Party has a lot of other different policies as well, that the other parties would have been given preference ahead of them, and that's the way they decided in Queensland. But I said, we're separate parties, and that's up for those guys to argue and defend the case.
I have talked to Rod Cullerton of the Gap, and I want to talk to Senator Rennick. But never say never. I mean, why should Labor still get 2? Is there any way that those can, if enough people woke up? That's what I'm saying. If there were a miracle awakening, and people thought William Bay is our man. It all comes down to who they vote for, doesn't it?
Look, the reality is you need a quota, I says, is 14.3% in the Senate. So we get 6 senators elected in each state, okay? The Greens are going to be very close, and again, so it's hand-to-hand comment. You're only going to move the dial a few percent in election campaigns. Right? That's the reality of life. It's only
and it doesn't help legacy media banning all of you independents. It doesn't help.
So the reality is you've got, at the moment, 3 parties effectively fighting for what is that last seat. If you throw you've got 4 parties, fighting for that last seat. And if you throw William Bay's party in, right, you've got 5 parties fighting for that last seat. And the reality is it's only one of them that is going to win. And the reality, as much as, I know they're going to probably jump up and down a bit, but the Great Australia Party in Queensland will be eliminated well before those other parties.
Well, one never knows in elections if the people wake up enough. But I would put an appeal out to legacy media: stop doing this. Stop supporting the 2 main parties that most people now around the world know in every country are corrupt, are absolute globalist puppets. Start having these independents on. Have you tried to appeal to the ABC and say, start having us on? There is much more support for independence, and it's growing every day.
Look, the ABC used to have, they had this segment called Media Watch, right? And it used to be like an attack on Craig Kelly, and they did one page. It was like Craig Kelly's war against the vaccines, right? And find that they find the most, but they'll take 50 pictures of you and they'll find the one where you're looking a bit strange or something.
Yes.
Right? Yes. They pick the worst possible picture up to you. We're sort of looking a bit crazy sort of thing, right? And they put he's a war against the vaccines, right? No. One day they did this program. I was using the data from Israel. Do you remember the data from Israel?
Oh, it was significant. It could have
really
set
it up. They were the first cab off the rank when it came to getting a large percentage of the population vaccinated. And they have these public available tables and databases, all age stratified, all very good to look at, right? And it showed the stuff didn't work, right? So I was continually posting. They put it up, I think it was every week or every fortnight. So I continually posted this data out of Israel. So you see it doesn't work. So the ABC did a whole segment on it, right? And what they did, they took what I had and they blurred all the numbers. Right? This is $1 billion organisation, right? So they did it in such low resolution off my social media pages. It was crisp and clear. They blurred the numbers so no one could actually look at it. So hang on a minute, this Kelly bloke's right on these things. And then they have someone that come on and go, oh, no, he's wrong. And they don't give you the opportunity to be interviewed or cross-examined or to fight back. That's the ABC. So, they've done comedy hit pieces on me, and not, when I say comedy, not even funny comedy hit pieces, just like, I just think just gross attacks on character sort of thing. They never give you the opportunity to go on and argue your case. So the closest I got to getting the ABC studios was last week when I stood outside the front with a whole lot of protesters saying, defund the ABC with a shirt on. So
I mean,
that's as close as I'll get to the ABC studios to make a comment at this election.
That by absolutely zero measure that is not journalism. That is just, there is no measure that says that's good journalism, just presenting one side. And this is what they are. And it's odd, isn't it? When we were little, we used to look across at China and think, oh, those poor Chinese, they only get the government perspective. And the people in the ABC have turned into that. One quick question, in your view, is the current Australian government operating under the law of the Commonwealth as federated in 1901? What's your take on that?
I know there's a lot of debate on this, on the Commonwealth. Yeah. I try not to get tied too much up in that, right?
But if it's a constitutional issue whereby actually the laws that are being passed are not constitutionally valid, and I loved constitutional law at law school, it is a fundamental.
Okay.
It goes
let's just say that argument's right. Okay.
Yep.
And every law passed for the last 40 years is invalid, right?
Yeah.
And you take it and you argue the case for years, and you go to the courts, and you finally get to the High Court, and you win the High Court, and the High Court says yes, we rule that that's correct. They've been operating out of jurisdiction, and every law they've passed over the last 40 years is invalid, right?
And the judges are all honourable, right, and they're not politically biased, and pigs are flying.
So you win that. So you go to all that effort and you win that argument. Okay. The next day they can recall Parliament and pass legislation to make it retrospective that everything that was invalid is now valid. And you've achieved nothing. Right? I sometimes think, it's a complicated area of policy, and I sometimes think we get tied up in these constitutional issues, and that instead of actually arguing the real hardcore policies that will have effect, like getting out of Paris, scrapping net zero, putting into our constitution a Bill of Rights to protect free speech, putting a limit on our migration, they're things that will have real effect on people and policies.
But your argument then applies to all of that. A future illicit government gets in and says we're just going to pass laws that wipe all that out. So what you're saying is none of it has any real value at all, and we need to absolutely defund centralised politics altogether, because it has no value at that point. If you've been passing illicit laws and you can simply with the swipe of a pen say it doesn't matter, then your whole constitutional legal system has no validity. And that's a shocking thought for our society.
Yeah. Look, no, I understand all those arguments, and I appreciate them. I have some strong sympathies for them. But as I said, if you argued that, remember, people have only got so much. You can only hit people with so many ideas and bits and pieces at once, right? Yeah. And if you argue very strongly on that case, right? Every time you argue on that case, you're distracting to me the real core issues that can make a difference. And I said, and even if you win that argument, at the end of the day, since you could go 2 decades of trying to win that argument, you win it in the High Court, and the next day the Parliament meets and says, okay, well, let's fix this up and let's pass law and make everything retrospective.
I think what we've nailed here is the feeling a lot of people have, Craig, at the moment, that I don't have a voice, and even if I fight for a voice, it won't be heard, and even if it is heard, it'll still be defeated or defiled by these corrupt politicians. So that the thing comes to, how on earth do we restructure our society? And this is a huge question. Yes, there is the mum and dad, how do I survive? And then there's the much bigger picture, which is is the Constitution valid? You know, are the laws valid? Are these people honourable? To which we can clearly say no. How do we put such a huge mess? This is the final question. How do we right the mess?
Firstly, you've got to vote. That's the first one. We hear there's some nonsense people going around telling people not to vote, right? Telling people who would otherwise vote for the freedom people not to vote. Now that's completely counterproductive, right? That is what the major parties want you to do. If you can't get them to vote for them, they don't want you to vote at all, right? Abstain, right? So you've got to make sure you vote. Secondly, if you're here in Australia, okay, if you might not like the Libertarians, join one of the other freedom parties. Get out and help on election day. Stand on an election booth and hand out how to vote cards. Get involved in your social media platforms. Right? Like the social media platforms gives us enormous opportunity to spread the message and spread the word with the algorithms. So if you see something you like, click the like button, click the share button, right? Put a comment, even if the comments are just a smiley face. That helps the algorithms spread those messages. And I'll wrap up one final quote. Margaret Mead, you might know this quote. And what she says, she said, never forget that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. For indeed, that is the only thing that ever has.
I love that quote.
That's right. So
I'd like to finish just with the Craig Kelly, the person. Do you have family support, Craig? How do you do this?
Look, I do. It's certainly difficult. It's certainly hard, actually really hard on the families. That's for sure, sort of thing. It's you go out in the streets and look at that. It's actually been diminished recently, but during that tough COVID period, you'd walk out in the streets, you'd have people abusing you. You have people coming up to you like in coffee shops and restaurants and, yelling at you and abusing you. I was out washing the car one day and some bloke walks past and starts to get stuck into me, sort of thing. You've just got to have a very thick skin. You've got to have confidence. You've got to know your stuff inside out. You've got to be able to debate it. You've got to never be frightened to debate. You've got to stand up if people say, "Oh, why did you go on that program? Why did you go on that program?" You debate with your enemies. You argue the case against them. Because ultimately, I think there's for most of us, there's a thing embedded in our DNA that says your job in life is to make sure that you're passing our country on to your kids and grandkids and great-grandkids, or the future generations, in a better shape and with more opportunity and more wealth than what you inherited from your forefathers. That is something that I think is embedded in most people's DNA. Unfortunately, it's not everyone's DNA, and those that don't agree with that and think it's all for today, they've taken a very big voice and control of the global political sphere. But I think we need more people that say, okay, we're doing this not to make the place, not to give someone an extra $1 or $20 today, but to make sure that we are passing, the country on and the world on in better place and better conditions than what we found. I think as long as we keep focusing on that, eventually we're going to win these battles.
Do you have children, Craig?
I do, yeah. I've got the two kids. I have a daughter. I have a little boy who's he's now 27. He was born with autism and born with Down syndrome, and then later was diagnosed with autism, sort of thing. So he's a blessing. It makes you understand that all life has great value. And sometimes it's easy to think the glass is half full or something. You've always got to look at the glass is a third full. It's a third full, not 2/3 empty, sort of thing. And every single life is precious.
So let's finish with the preferences. What preferences would you say to people? Because this is what I want them to carry away.
I would say vote for your Libertarian. Now, in New South Wales, we are running a joint ticket. It's Libertarian, Gerard Rennick and the Heart Party. The Heart Party with the informed medical options. So it's a joint ticket, a freedom coalition, right? Any of those parties, you vote for number one and give us your support. We've talked about the importance of running these joint tickets and combining the parties together. That's what we've done partly in New South Wales. So give us your number one for those, okay? Number 2, 3, 4, and 5, any of the other freedom parties, okay? And when it comes to putting Labor before, put the Greens last, put the Teals second last, right? Put Labor third last, and put the Liberal coalition fourth last.
It's very good advice. And I think that's crucial to end on that note. So that really resonates in the minds of the voters. Craig Kelly, it's been a real honour talking to you and a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz. I've appreciated you. I followed your work from across the ditch sort of thing. So across the Tasman sort of things like that. As I said, it's great to finally speak with you.
I think Australia has good prospects with somebody like you and Gerard Rennick and Rod Cullerton, and I hope William Bay and others. The independents are the way to go this election. Thank you, Craig Kelly.
Thanks, Liz.